Hello and welcome. My name is Zaffar Iqbal and you are watching the Mojo Story. As Israel-Hamas war raged on in its second week with thousands killed in Israeli retaliation in Gaza following the Hamas attack on October 7 that killed over 1,200 Israelis and another 200 were taken captive by Hamas into Gaza. I'm now joined by former Palestinian Authority spokesperson, a political analyst, a former journalist, and a founding member of Democratic National Assembly of Palestine, Nour Odeh. Welcome to the show, Nour. I just want to start with asking you, where were you when October 7 attack happened on Israel, and what was your first reaction when you heard about that news?
Thank you for having me. I was home. It's Saturday is the second day of the weekend in Palestine. It was early morning, so I woke up
Yeah,
to the news, and after the initial shock and disbelief, I guess it was quickly obvious that this was a very dramatic event, that it would have far-reaching consequences, and I dreaded immediately, having covered the story and being a Palestinian and living the story for so many
yeah,
years, I dreaded what the days ahead would carry for Palestinians, for my friends and loved ones in Gaza.
right. And how is the situation right now in Gaza? I know you are in West Bank, but when you hear about this constant pounding of civilian areas in Gaza by Israeli airstrikes.
Well, the UN has said that this is a humanitarian catastrophe. The other international organizations are warning that Israel is using
Yeah,
starvation as a weapon of war against the civilian population in Gaza. This is a
yeah,
very small piece of land.
yeah,
2.3 million people live in it. Half of them are children. And already, Israeli bombardment has left 50% of housing units in Gaza either completely obliterated or destroyed beyond any hope of repair. So they cannot be used. They're not safe. They're uninhabitable.
yeah,
Adding to that, Israel immediately imposed a complete siege on Gaza, not allowing food, fuel, water, or medicine into the Gaza Strip. So the hospitals are at a breaking point. They are running out of just about everything, including anesthetics, including surgical sutures. Um, they're having to resort to using things like, soap and and other products they can find in the supermarket to tend to some of the wounds that keep streaming into these hospitals.
right. You talked about hospitals. How are doctors and paramedics dealing with the situation? We know that electricity has been put off, water has been put off. There are some supplies that are going into Gaza right now, but it must be an extremely difficult situation for those who are treating those hundreds of injured people who are going to the hospitals.
Well, they are nothing short of heroes. They have been at these hospitals for 19 days now. Many of them have lost loved ones and families. Some of them have lost all of their family in Israeli bombardment. So they are under the same conditions and the same dangers that everybody else
Yeah,
in Gaza is facing. They they have to keep going, I guess. And that's what they keep saying in various interviews. We have an
yeah,
obligation towards our patients. 22 hospitals have been under threat by the Israeli military. They've been ordered to evacuate or risk bombardment. And these
yeah,
doctors, these brave doctors, have decided to stay, to protect their patients, and to continue providing life saving treatment. They're working under impossible conditions. And now, especially in the past 2 days, I think it's become more and more common to see them breaking down. They are human after all, and the conditions they're enduring are simply unbearable.
Uh, it's absolutely appalling to see that so many children have been
Mhm.
affected by the strikes in Gaza. And there is also a talk about a ground invasion by Israel. Do you think that will complicate the situation more, and it will lead to more civilian casualties on the ground?
It is a terrifying prospect, I have to be honest. Israel has killed more Palestinians in the past 19 days than it has killed in several years in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and that's saying a lot. It has dropped more bombs on Gaza in the past 19 years than the US bomb dropped on Afghanistan in a year. Um, the violence that is being used against Gaza already is astounding. It is unprecedented. And to add to that, ground invasion, especially given the statements
Yeah.
that we've heard from Israeli leaders that do not draw any distinction between civilians and armed groups, is terrifying because it means that now the number is almost 7,000 casualties. And that number will, at least double if ground troops are on the ground.
Right. You have been a journalist in the past. How difficult it is for journalists reporting from Gaza? Uh, there's reportedly an Al Jazeera journalist whose family was killed
Yeah.
in an airstrike that happened last night. What is the situation for journalists reporting from the ground in Gaza? We can see from those visuals that's a journalist holding a small baby uh, in the lap and really breaking down after hearing that news.
Yes, that's actually that. Uh, this child right now is his daughter. Earlier, you saw him carrying his 1 month old grandchild. Wael was my colleague. I worked alongside him for years in Gaza. And, covering the news in Gaza is an extremely dangerous affair. There are no protections. The Palestinian journalists are not immune from Israeli airstrikes or from
Yeah.
Israeli threats. Already in 19 days, more than 23 Palestinian journalists have been killed in Gaza. Some of them were directly targeted while doing their job, others were targeted while they were sleeping in their home with their family, and they were killed alongside their family. It's an extreme situation. And on top of that, just like the rest of the population, they're hungry, they're dehydrated, and they're sleep deprived. And to be able to continue to bring us the news, to bring us the facts, is a great service, I think, to the public worldwide, and also to truth, which we must really endeavor to protect in line of all of the disinformation that's flying around.
You know, come back to the basic question. The attack, the Hamas carried out this attack, and that was followed by the retaliation from Israel. How much of all of that has impacted the peace process on the ground? Uh, any chances of reconciliation right now or in the future after the tensions de-escalate?
Well, thank you for asking that question because I think it's important for your viewers to understand that there hasn't been a peace process for many, many years, and that the current Israeli government has in its program, in its coalition agreement, the goal of decimating hope for Palestinian statehood. This government does not recognize the existence of a Palestinian people, rejects the notion that Palestinians are entitled to self determination. And in the past 2 years, the UN has been reporting and warning that Israel was using extreme violence and breaking records for the number of Palestinians killed, the number of Palestinian children killed, of Palestinian homes demolished. That was before
Yeah.
October 7th. And that's why it's very important to keep in mind that this conflict, this monstrous war, uh, didn't happen in a vacuum. Events did not start on October the 7th. This is a story about a people held captive by an occupier for over half a century, denied their rights, brutalized, dispossessed, and oppressed, and then told that any form of dissent, even if it is diplomatic steps, can be and will be maligned as terrorism. It's an untenable situation and one that leaves very little hope for Palestinians to break through from this reality of subjugation and oppression. The only, I think, hope that Palestinians can count on is the fact that international public opinion has rejected this false framing of Israel, that these attacks happened in a vacuum, that it is extending its hand in peace when everybody knows that it's not. And we need to push leaders around the world to be more responsible, to act proactively and not talk about peace, but rather make it encourage the countries, make it more profitable to invest in peace than to manage the occupation.
Right. You talked about that it did not happen in vacuum. We can see on the screen Secretary General, in fact, said that, and now Israel has, in fact, stopped giving access to the UN officials also. And you
Mm.
talked about public opinion, but the fact is also that the world leaders were first to condemn the attack on Israel, and the West seemed to be united on that proposition at least.
Well, look, politically speaking, and even in terms of being consistent as far as the respect for the right of civilians to protection, countries can condemn the attack carried out by Hamas and still condemn the international crimes committed by Israel. Their lack of consistency, their double standards, the fact that they have called similar actions conducted by other countries war crimes and they are covering for Israel right now, uh, really undermines the credibility of this whole international system of the ability of countries to come together in dialogue to resolve conflicts and ensure peace. It's not enough for countries to say, or states to say, that they're concerned about Palestinian civilians. It's not enough for them to urge Israel to protect civilians and respect international law. There have to be consequences. You cannot allow a country to continue to act as if it is above the law, above the reach of accountability, and to have that sense of entitlement to express indignation when the representative of the international organization, the United Nations, presents the conflict as it is, for the facts that it entails, for the framing and the historical background that it has. It is astounding to continue to see that kind of denialism. And I think it's very important for us all to remember that, atrocities across history started with dehumanization, as we've heard Israeli officials calling Palestinians human animals, but it also was emboldened and enabled by denialism, denying that you are victimizing a people, denying that you're killing a people, denying that you're targeting civilians and getting away with those lies. That is a recipe for more slaughter, for more bloodshed, certainly not for getting any closer to peace.
Yes, but the argument can be turned around. There is a context to it. It all started with October 7 when Hamas, really carried out that attack inside Israel, and that led to casualties, most of them civilians, 1,200 of them. That actually was the trigger of all of this.
Was it? Was it? And what was the trigger for Israeli atrocities committed even before Hamas was founded? What was the trigger for Israel to kill more Palestinians in the West Bank last year than it did in the past 15 years, where Hamas is not in power? To allow the argument, uh, A, that revenge is an acceptable policy, and B, that civilian casualties are acceptable if you're indignant enough and if you feel that you are lashing out in response to attack. These are very dangerous arguments. They set the stage for a world of savagery, not a world of laws. Even at times of war, there are rules that must be abided by, that must be respected. And that's what happened after World War II. The countries came together and they adopted the Fourth Geneva Convention, which outlawed the targeting of civilians. It outlawed collective punishment. Israel now wants to go back to an era before all of that, all of those achievements for humanity happened. It wants to be given carte blanche to kill at will, to destroy, to decimate a territory under its occupation, under its absolute control, in the name of revenge. That's not a policy that any self-respecting country should accept.
Right. I want to turn the attention towards hostage, 200 of them in Gaza. And that's really complicated this entire thing. Some say that Israel is not going ahead with the ground invasion just because there are hostage there. Some of them have been released by efforts of other countries in the region like Oman. How do you see that situation developing here on?
Well, apologies. I know that there are talks and that Qatar and Egypt have been very involved in attempting to reach a deal whereby Israel releases the civilians, the foreign nationals as well, that not just Hamas, but there are other groups that hold Israelis captives. This was a massive event, and thousands of people crossed the border into Israel, broke through Gaza's border with Israel. This wasn't just the Hamas military wing. But in any case, Hamas signaled from first day that it wanted to release foreign nationals, that it was willing to release the civilians, as we saw, and I think the talks right now revolve around releasing the hundreds of Palestinian children and women that Israel holds in prison, many of them without charge or trial, and to also allow fuel into Gaza in order for hospitals to have a chance to continue to operate, the incubators for premature babies and the ICU units for the gravely injured, and also to be able to pump water and bake bread so that starvation doesn't reach massive casualty proportions. I'm hopeful that these talks will yield results sooner rather than later. But again, this is a very extreme situation, a very complex situation, and the nuance here and the context is extremely important. It's important to remember how and in what context all of this is happening. It's not two countries at war. It is an occupied people and their occupier going head to head.
Right, but some also say that even if the people from Gaza want to move out, the other countries in the neighborhood do not allow them to go and to be in refugees in their own country. So they are really stuck in this situation, sandwiched in the middle of the war. Where do they go? Because the other neighboring countries can give them some sort of a access to their areas, at least till the time the war continues. What do you say about that?
Two things. One is very little in the Middle East is temporary. And the majority of residents in Gaza are refugees. They were already dispossessed from their homes by Israel in 1948. They were told that they only have to leave for a few days until the hostilities end and they would be able to return. They've been denied that right ever since. So there is a collective trauma about the idea that Palestinians should leave their homes while the war rages. Palestinians don't want to go to Sinai, which is the only, in Egypt, which is the only country that shares a border with them besides Israel. They have not asked for that. In fact, they've asked Egypt not to accept the outrageous proposal by Israel that it should absorb the population of Gaza until Israel is done destroying and decimating the Gaza Strip. It's not a solution. The solution is not to allow war to rage on. It's to find a way to end it and to sit at the table and find a political solution. Israel cannot bomb its way into security. It cannot bomb its way out of concerns emanating from its continued occupation. The only way for this, for the root cause of this to be resolved, is by Israel sitting down and accepting the fact that Palestinians are not going to go anywhere, and Israel has to let them go. It has to end its occupation of their land and allow them to be free in a country of their own. Even though it has all that firepower, even though it can destroy Gaza, that still won't change the fact that Palestinians will continue to want to be free. They don't want to be ruled against their will by Israel or anybody else for that matter.
Right. So if the people are there and they're not going away and this war continues, we know that there have been aerial strikes by Israel so far, but now there are reports that Israeli tanks have raided into Gaza. This is some sort of surgical strikes before a full-scale ground invasion. So obviously this death toll of civilians is only going to mount by the day when that happens.
Yes, and that's why we need to ask, we need to continue demanding a ceasefire. We need to continue holding Israel to account. And Israel must understand that there will be consequences for violating the right of civilians to safety. The International Criminal Court already has an open investigation into previous Israeli war crimes. And the prosecutor of that court has already signaled that he will go to Gaza when he can, because he already suspects that more war crimes have been committed against Palestinians. Now we need to see more countries make it very clear that Israel will have to, face consequences by way of political or financial consequences bilaterally, but to abandon hope of compliance and simply submit to the fact that Israel will just continue doing what it does, and we need to find a way to somehow mitigate the consequences is really a recipe for more of the same, and the same and the status quo is too tragic to tolerate.
And how do you see the role of other, regional powers like Iran? We've been seeing statements coming from Iran, uh, a series of statements, and obviously Israel also talking about the involvement of Iran. There are recent reports that 500 men of Hamas were actually trained in of Hamas were trained in Iran before the attack was launched. How do you see that sort of a role of the neighboring countries, particularly Iran, in this conflict,
Mm.
as it seems to be expanding?
I haven't seen that report, but it's not a secret that Iran supports Palestinian groups, including Hamas and Islam, or particularly Hamas and Islamic Jihad. They view themselves as part of the resistance cluster or axis in the region, and that role is viewed by the United States as destabilizing. I think the only part of that puzzle that is missing, or that debate that is missing, is why is it so easy for countries to meddle in this region? It's because there is a very fertile ground for frustration, for anger, because of prolonged injustice. A situation where Palestinians are free and secure would cancel all of those conditions and would not make it easy for any country, Iran, the US, or anybody else, to interfere in Palestinian politics or in the stability of the region, which cannot and must not come at the cost of any people, including the Palestinians. Israel cannot be the only measure for peace and stability in the region.
US has said, in fact, acknowledged that there will be a collateral damage, in a sense, uh, will suffer if when this war continues, given the dynamics of the war, and when President uh, Biden was specifically asked, he said that he is not sure about the reports coming from Gaza about the number of casualties, but of course that, in a sense, will be collateral damage in this ongoing conflict. How
Mhm.
do you see that statement?
Well, I see it very dangerous because denying the commission of atrocities is complicity in their commission. And we've seen that happening to cover other acts of genocide around the world. In addition to to two things that are very important, the US State Department just a few months ago was quoting the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza about figures relating to the health sector. So it is quite hypocritical and quite convenient to now be invoking doubt when Israel is committing these crimes in order to downplay the extent to which civilians are targeted. Wars are brutal and bloody, of course, and there's always hardship imposed on the civilians. But we're talking about something entirely different. We're talking about the targeting of civilians. Civilians are being bombed directly. They're not getting killed inadvertently. Otherwise, it wouldn't be the case that 70% of Palestinians in Gaza killed already are women, children, and the elderly. They're not legitimate targets. There are civilians. These are not inadvertent casualties of war. These are the targets of these bombardment campaigns. And there's a very big difference, a whole world of difference between that and the hardships of war. Biden has been very consistently siding with Israel, adopting its narrative. In fact, this is not the first time he also falls for Israeli spin and then later have to walk it back during these past 19 days. So I wouldn't, I worry that there's a concerted effort to downplay what is happening in Gaza in order to cover for even more crimes in Gaza. And I think we need to be vigilant and we need to push back. These numbers have been reliable. They are used by the United Nations and international organizations. They've been cross checked and referenced in previous wars, and the numbers have always matched. So there was absolutely no logical reason for us to doubt them now when it matters.
Right. And lastly, I want to ask you about Hamas. Israel has made it very clear that they're going to wipe off Hamas. That is something that is not negotiable for them at this point in time, though Americans have said that they have no intent to occupy and to control Gaza. But one thing is for sure that they're going to eliminate Hamas. How do you see the situation developing there? Hamas carried out this attack. Does it have the people backing? Will it be able to survive in the future after Israeli objectives, war objectives are fulfilled?
Well, I think it's sad that the Israelis and the Americans are misleading their publics so prolifically. First of all, Hamas is not a foreign group that somehow popped in Gaza and took control of it and only exists there. Hamas is a Palestinian political group that was founded in 1989. It has following and backing not just in Gaza but also around the world and in the West Bank. It has a women's movement, a youth movement. It participated in elections, even though the world imposed sanctions on Palestinians after those elections for choosing the wrong people, I guess. So measuring the popularity or public backing of Hamas cannot be limited to Gaza, because that's not the only place where Hamas exists. And to allege or to purport that you have the ability to completely wipe out a group, unless you mean to kill every single one of their members and supporters and commit a complete act of wanton massacre, is simply impractical. It cannot be practically achieved. That you can decimate Hamas, you can attack its military wing, you can perhaps debilitate it militarily. But to say that your objective is to wipe out Hamas is A, genocidal, and two, just not achievable.
But the context has changed now, because what was done on October 7th across the board is seen as an act of terror. A government running in a particular area conducting those operations and being very open about it. There are those body cams, those images which have been released by Israel, and
Mm.
also the interrogation of its men. That makes it entirely different.
Well, I don't accept that video of the interrogation. I doubt its veracity, and I have, um, we've seen Israel doctor videos and makeup evidence like that before, so I wouldn't count on that video. But let me
Yeah.
reverse that logic that you just presented, because if we're going to use that logic, that what Hamas did on October 7th would excuse extermination, would excuse genocide, then what are Palestinians to say? Because by that logic, Palestinians will tell you Israel has been occupying our land. It has been going into our cities and committing acts of murder, of mass murder, for 56 years. Does that mean that Palestinians have the right to say that we will go in and finish off everybody involved in Israel? That this is the kind of logic that is being used to excuse Israeli crimes and Israeli genocide. It is very toxic, it's irresponsible, and it shouldn't be entertained. An act of violence does not excuse genocide. It doesn't excuse mass murder. It doesn't excuse attacking civilians. And it doesn't excuse collective punishment. That's just the fact of life, and that's the fact of law. And if Israel wants to cite atrocities, Palestinians have a very long list of atrocities committed by the Israeli army on Palestinian land against Palestinian civilians in their thousands. This is a very dangerous road to go down to, and that one that will lead to nowhere good. The right way, the only way, is to move forwards towards justice and peace, and not towards vengeance, because vengeance is not a way that can save lives. It's not a way that can secure stability and peace in any region.
Nour Odeh, thanks so much for joining us with your perspective and giving us all the inputs from West Bank and about Gaza. That's all we have on the show today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.